Live
Live
stream
stream
is on.
is on.
That's funny.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gerry. It is December 4th, 2020. And first of all, I want to thank Clinton Ignatoff, Netizen Supreme, for hosting us. And it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with Jeffrey Lewis. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Hey, well, hello from New York City. Where are you currently?
I am in Venice, California, and Clinton's in Toronto, Canada. So the first question is, Jeffrey, what's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being? Drawing comic books, I guess, although I don't know if that applies to everybody, but that's the best thing I've found.
I like that. And so what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, I guess music is kind of supremely enjoyable and flexible and multifaceted. So, yeah, I guess I would say music.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, because we're somehow part of an evolutionary process in which genes are being replaced by memes, meaning that we don't have instincts to tell us exactly what to do. We have culture instead. So instead of shuffling genes from generation to generation to generation to generation, which is happening to create our physical bodies, but we shuffle memes from generation to generation to generation so that all of the ideas are being shook up and exchanged and cross-pollinated so that the strongest ideas are constantly evolutionarily coming to the fore and teaching us culturally how to survive in a way that animals rely more on gene information to survive. Humans rely quite a bit on meme information to survive.
That was really deep. Thank you. But Jeffrey, the next question you sort of answered, but it goes like this. Is this need or desire to collect information hardwired in us, or did we invent it? Is it innate or invented?
I think it's innate.
Yeah.
Although, William S. Burroughs had that theory that language is a virus.
Right.
And that is kind of an interesting way of thinking about how maybe it's not innate. Maybe it's just some strange accident that has a glitch in our physical brain functioning.
Yeah. And so do thoughts create emotions?
Yes. Well, no. Well, I mean, that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, you could say emotions create thoughts, but then thoughts do create emotions, and then emotions create thoughts, and all of that stuff is created by, what you had for breakfast, and whether you just drank a cup of coffee, and whether you just stepped on a nail. So, chemical input, physical input, do thoughts create emotions, or do emotions create thought? It's like the chicken or the egg, really.
Yeah. Jeffrey, did humans invent thinking, or is it innate in us?
Say again?
Is thinking in humans innate or invented?
Innate.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I pursue victory. I don't know if that is, I don't know what category that falls into. I think of it as happiness, but I know that that's not contentment because it's just an ephemeral state. But the happiest moments seem to be, to me, the ones that correlate to what I would call victory in a kind of general sense. But I don't know if that's me. I ruminate to find meaning, but that seems to cause discomfort, even though it's kind of like a default a default operation of my brain is the rumination to find meaning. But victory seems to be where happiness is for me.
I like that word. I want to get into it, but it's interesting because I got the question from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He says that meaning lasts and happiness doesn't.
Well, I take him with a grain of salt, although I'm proud to know exactly what you're talking about because I have read that book. But I feel like he's just one more therapist who thinks that their own individual idea is the one that explains everything, because they're all like cult leaders trying to come up with, and maybe they garner a few followers, but you could come up with an idea and I could come up with an idea. He came up with an idea. Yeah. Each person, once in a while, one of these people who generates an idea or a framework does attain a number of followers, like say a Freud or a Marx or somebody who comes up with a certain framework that is so brilliant and so explanatory as a helpful framework that it does, we do gravitate towards it. But that's like what I was saying earlier about the evolution of memes and ideas, and as a sort of cultural Darwinism of which frameworks are useful for us in culture. I don't think that what does he call it? I was going to say logarithm, but
yeah, I think that's it.
It's not, no, a logarithm. It's not, it's a logotherapy.
Yeah, sounds right. Logotherapy.
It has a bit of juice to it, but it doesn't sound like anything more interesting than just a friend who tells me an interesting theory. I don't think that he, as an author or inventor, came up with such a brilliant framework that it changes our whole perception of culture. I'm not that moved by it.
Well done. Does the brain more detect consciousness, or does it more create consciousness?
Well, that's an interesting question. Create consciousness, I believe.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm sure there is an actual answer to that question, but I'm the wrong person to ask. I would just be guessing.
Well, the whole purpose of this series is to guess, so that's fine. So you can't, this is Audre Lorde, the poet. You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Audre Lorde. Yvonne Rainer responded, you can if you expose the tools. Those two quotes aside, what new tool do you suggest?
Well, why? I don't entirely understand why I would want to suggest to somebody a way to dismantle, or a way, I've been greatly influenced by the comic book writer Alan Moore, and he has a lot of thoughts about alchemy. And even though I think a lot of that alchemy stuff is kind of silly and I don't know, I'm a little too skeptical of like non-scientific hoo-ha, but some of his things that he said are very interesting about solve and coagula, if I'm pronouncing those right. These are two concepts in alchemy. One is learning how to take things apart, and one is putting different things together. And you can learn different things, and the ancient alchemists, supposedly, according to the comic book writer Alan Moore, the ancient alchemists, some of them were involved in solve and some were involved in coagula. And that's like taking things apart to learn stuff, or putting different things together to learn stuff. So that question about how to disassemble the house and what tools, that seems like it's an assumption that taking things apart is where we need to focus. But you could just as well be building. So I don't know. I've suffered a lot from taking things apart a lot. I feel like I've had a lot of anxiety and distress from putting mental energy into disassembling things. And I don't know if I would feel like I don't know if I feel like building tools to make other people disassemble things. I feel like assembling is maybe a little more of a challenge. Building something is maybe better than destroying something.
Dude, it sort of evokes and resonates with McLuhan differentiating between matching and making. But that was really deep. So what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
You know, I would say that's too personal to get into here.
That is a great answer. I never had that answer. Thank you. I'm totally fine with that. McLuhan also learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of what we invent so we can learn to cope with them. So he says, we look to the artist, comic book artists, writers, musicians, to uncover the hidden psychic effects, but we still ignore them. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though we can look to the artist to reveal them?
Well, I think it's a bit like how I was thinking about Victor, what's his name, Frankl, with the logotherapy. The artist is very similar to somebody in the therapeutic profession who comes up with a concept of how to look at things. The artist gives, Cezanne gives you an option of how to look at things. Toulouse-Lautrec gives you an option to how to look at things. Robert Crumb, the comic book artist, gives you an option of how to look at things. Each one of them might perhaps, like a therapist coming up with a theory, each one of them might perhaps say that their way of looking at things is the way, the true way, the way of looking at things. But I don't think that we're ignoring the power of art just because we don't necessarily go along with each one of these sort of cult leaders. We go through the museum and we say, oh, isn't that amazing? That's how Cezanne thinks that we could look at things. And then that's how, Matisse thinks that we can look at things. And then that's how Robert Crumb thinks that we can look at things. And that's how Jeffrey Lewis thinks that we can look at things. Each one wrestling with their own experience and their own framework and their own human skill to present the drama of their struggle to understand things. But it's not, I don't see a reason why one of those perspectives should be the perspective that all humans agree with. So I don't, so the idea that a human is not like so devoted to the artistic vision, each person has their own artistic vision. Each person has their own drama of figuring out, how they see things.
Really well put. I'm learning a lot. I really appreciate it. You're very articulate, Jeffrey. McLuhan came up with these 4 words, and I'm always struggling to figure out what he means, but it doesn't matter what he meant. And you brought up the word drama. He said the drama of cognition. Does that resonate with you at all or say anything to you?
McLuhan said, I've never read McLuhan.
But he basically, what I think he's saying is, if you invent thinking, you bet you're going to have drama. But I know it's probably much deeper than that. But the drama of cognition is sort of fun 4 words to slam together.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What was the question?
Oh, well, just if anything resonated with you in those 4 words, the drama of cognition.
Yeah, I think, that's resonant. That's a interesting thing to think about. I can feel that. I like that. Thank you for passing that along to me.
Yeah. In fact, have you ever read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud?
Oh, sure, of course.
Dude, he goes into McLuhan a little. He's sort of a semi-McLuhanite. And,
yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Ooh. Well, I guess my concept of new ideas is like they need to be more tested before, it's too, the old ideas, I think, should be, they've had a chance to get tested. I'm basically thinking of it in, now that you've got, you've put me in a mode where I feel like I'm showing off my, well, it's just an interesting kind of interview to bring up these kinds of things. But, I would say that makes me think of the concept of the historical dialectic, where you have the thesis and the antithesis and then the synthesis. So a new idea that represents a synthesis of old ideas, that seems very positive to me. But a new idea that has not yet been tested against its anti-idea and arrived at a synthesis, that seems like a very dangerous extremist thing to go for. So, for example, like the idea of socialism in the as applied to the United States, the idea of a democratic socialism as represented by somebody like Bernie Sanders. That seems like a very healthy, calmly arrived at synthesis of ideas that have been attempted to various extremes over the past 100 years or 200 years even. And this is a reasonable synthesis. But I think problematically, a lot of middle paths, a lot of things that are not extreme, have a hard time getting, enthusiastic adherence, because people are more, the mind gravitates towards these like big extreme statements rather than these like smaller synthesized statements. Well, let's try a little of this and a little of this and put them together in a nice combination based on what we've learned from history. People like that who take the middle path don't seem to fare very well. Like Gorbachev in the Soviet Union was trying to basically get to someplace like that from the other direction. He was trying to court a middle path between, democracy, which is essentially, which you could say is kind of like anarchy, and a free market, which you could say is kind of like a completely unsafe, deregulated, dangerous, chaotic, inhumane environment, and a communist, consciously controlled, logical economy and society. And Gorbachev was trying to chart a middle path, and everything fell apart around him. And people either went super capitalist or super communist, and the gentler, better, more humane world that he was trying to install with his reformations fell apart. And you could say that for somebody like Bernie Sanders. You could say that for Salvador Allende in Chile. These middle path reformers who are not violent extremists, they seem to point the way towards the way that things should go as a synthesis. But so far, it's been hard for them to gain traction, judging by the last 150 years. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. These things take time.
I like that. And Utah Phillips said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Any comment?
He's a classic example, to my mind, of a kind of red state libertarian. I think if you live a rural life, you can indulge in these self-sustaining, self-sufficient, up by your own bootstraps, libertarian anarchy ideas. But that's not really realistic for the world that we live in, where we do have to interact with people. There is a globalism, there is a cosmopolitan, urban, but that's just my blue state, urban dwelling New York City perspective, where I see that. I love Utah Phillips's work. I once did a comic book biography of Utah Phillips. I interviewed him over the phone when I did these comic book about him. I love his recordings and his stories and his style. But that kind of, I don't think that Woody Guthrie would have agreed with that kind of libertarian anarchy.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's a deeper researcher specifically into anarchy said, cute quote, but it's not really what anarchy is. So we'll move on. Jeffrey, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
I remember having a very frightening nightmare when I was little about some kind of half human, half gorilla sort of armless, legless creature in the bathroom in the night on a nighttime trip to the bathroom, and it was a very like shocking, nightmarish image of this kind of half partial human, partial gorilla thing in the bathroom. And I think that I got that image from, in retrospect, I think there was a National Geographic article that I saw that had very sort of grotesque, frightening images of Neanderthal humans or concepts about what the missing link might have looked like. And they were sort of like these half human, half gorilla type forms. And I suspect that that's maybe where I got the fearful image. And but that's one of my earliest memories.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, I don't think we have. I think memory and consciousness are the same thing. So I don't think we could have. Memory is no more or less a curse than consciousness. So, and who knows what we don't remember? We don't remember what we don't remember. So we don't even know. I don't even think we could judge whether it's a curse or a blessing, because there's so much of you. There's so much of you that's in other people's hard drives and not your own. There's so much of you there's more hours, there's more minutes of your life stored in other people's brains than there are in your brain. So, what is your own memory, your memory of yourself, which is your consciousness, even on a moment-to-moment level, is very impartial. It's not a full assessment. So, yeah, I don't know.
That was good. That was good. James Joyce said, "Remember to forget." So, Jeffrey,
so did Jim Morrison.
Huh?
Wasn't that? Well, learn to forget in that Doors song.
No. Oh, as Doors say, learn to forget. Oh, vey. I live in Venice, California, where it's illegal to hate the Doors, but I sort of hate them. But they're an amazing, important band. But great rock star, but shitty poet.
Yeah, I'm very ambivalent about the Doors. I have every record, and there's certain tracks that are undeniable. But there's I always try to put my finger on why do I not like what is it to not why do I like Jefferson Airplane so much? Why do I like the Grateful Dead so much and not like the Doors? Why do I like Moby Grape so much? And what is the grudge against the Doors?
That's beautiful. In fact, George Clinton nailed it. I says, he says, the music I like the best is the music that's bugging the shit out of me. And I'm trying to figure out why I don't like this, So that's you can just turn the channel. So Jeffrey, who was your earliest role model or the person who made an impact on you? Specifically, what was that impact within your immediate family and outside your immediate family? Just briefly.
Well, I had a babysitter who lived across the street from where I grew up, and she really encouraged my artisticness, and I always kind of credit her with helping me define myself as an artist from a young age. And she got me into some interesting comic books that were maybe a little, they were like more mature than the standard comic books that I'd been exposed to. And I feel like that was also very interesting and formative for me. So I think Lori was her name, and I think of her as somebody very formative for me.
So what you mean that she was turning on to underground comics or what?
Well, ElfQuest specifically. ElfQuest was a black and white independent comic that was coming out since the late 70s. And it was just on a more mature level, and being independent and alternative, it just had a very different vibe to it from the kinds of Marvel comics that I normally read. So it was an interesting addition to my comic book reading at a young age. And that was cool.
And then inside your immediate family, who would you say was a role model or had an impact on you specifically?
Well, I mean, one's parents are inevitably a colossal impact. I think my father and my mother, but that's just such a normal answer. I mean, how could that not be the answer for everybody?
No, that's fine. What do you think you got specifically from your dad and mom? Just briefly.
Oh, geez. Well, um, from my mom, like a lot of empathy for other people, like a tremendous sensitivity towards um, putting yourself in other people's shoes and being kind, trying to be kind to people, which is um, and and also a kind of playful creativity in drawing and coming up with fun ideas and being creative with very small means. Um, and that kind of playfulness, even under difficult circumstances, I feel like is very important to me and really feeds into a lot of the music and art that I make. Um, and also, my mom is just super, like, kind of smart and well read, but in a very humble way, where she would never like boast about it, but she just knows a huge amount. And from my father, I got a very almost like the opposite, kind of a very self-centered sense of adventure, that you don't need to conform to any rules, and only a sucker would have a job, and you as just a natural force in the in a more libertarian way, even though my parents are both very like left wing in a non-libertarian way. But
Good. Did they raise your particular religion?
no, I mean, standard Jewish atheist communist, red baby, New York City, the standard American nightmare, intellectual Jewish atheist, communist background.
Do you pray?
And absolutely not. I mean, I've never been bar mitzvahed. I've never, if it was up to I was, raised in just a purely scientific, non-religious, and it was very, it seemed very right to me, even as a child. I remember I went to some kind of Jewish nursery school at age 3 or age 4, just because it was like, I guess, the only childcare option at the time in the neighborhood. And I remember them telling us Bible stories, and I was just like, this is bullshit. Like, I remember, like, even as like a 3-year-old in this class, I'm like, why are they telling us these nonsense lies? Like, I just always had a very non-religious kind of, skeptical scientific filter on, which obviously I got from my parents.
Yeah. So if God exists, what do you want God to tell you after you die?
Oof.
I guess that's a good thing right there. Oof.
I guess he would have to, I guess I would want him to tell me, it's completely okay that you didn't believe in me. I'll let you in here anyway.
Yeah, the great joke is you get to heaven and St. Pete's there, and they got a big comic book store and comic books all over you. And you go, wow, is there comic books in heaven? He goes, that's all there is. Then you get to hell and the exact same thing happens. So, Jeffrey, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think there's just levels of selfishness. There's just levels of empathy or levels of selfishness. And they're two opposing parts of the general game theory of our self-preservation evolution. And, it's not all, people doing evil. It's always somebody else's definition. It's justified to the person doing it as the thing that they're supposed to do. So, yeah, I mean, there isn't evil in that sense. There's only evil on the receiving end of things.
Got it. That was good. No, that was good. Let's move on. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set this one up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. Fellini says, I need an enemy. Chinese proverb, he who cannot agree with their enemy is controlled by them. So it's a lot of thoughts. The question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think that's awkwardly phrased. I think Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and people like that, those are the most famous examples to everybody, but a lot of other people who followed those tenets, that seems to me the most effective way of shifting the framework and shifting the reality. You live it bravely. I mean, be the change you want to see. There you go. That's Gandhi's quote. While doing no harm and because the harm that you do to your enemy seems to me to it empowers them. It gives them tools with which to fight you back on a playing field on which they are superior. It shifts it to the framework in which they can defeat you. So if you but that doesn't, so in that sense, I think it sounds like you have to acknowledge your enemies. You don't just ignore them. I mean, Gandhi wasn't like, well, let's just keep doing our work and we'll defeat the British imperialists by just ignoring them and pretending they're not there. That's not the way to do it. You have to acknowledge that. You have to have the bravery to acknowledge the problem and acknowledge the difficulty that you're going to encounter by trying to not live by their framework, but impose your own framework.
Yeah, well done. American Indians say your enemy is your best teacher.
That's a very interesting statement.
So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He says, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, that's a pretty big question. I mean, Scott McCloud sort of tackles some of that in Understanding Comics. This is like a perennial philosophical question, like why do we have art? It's fun to make art. It's a fun process to engage in making, like you're like making a dream. And I guess I like to think of it as art serves as an entertaining metaphor for how well humans can do anything, for how well humans can face challenges. So I think our enjoyment of making art and our enjoyment of imbibing art is kind of our congratulation of the brilliance of our own humanity. And specifically, the more removed it is from practical purposes, the more it serves as a metaphor for the capabilities of humanity. So it makes us feel good. It makes us feel like, wow, somebody can just arbitrarily take on the challenge of making this theatrical experience, and they do it so well. You know what? It doesn't matter if the river dries up and there's no more fish and there's no more things to eat. Humans are amazing. We are going to be fine. We are going to be fine. So I think that art as a metaphor for our own powers and abilities is part of what makes us feel so good about making it and taking it in.
That is good, Jeffrey. Did you get that more from the way your parents raised you or more on your own?
Well, my parents are not artists, and a lot of my, all of my feelings about making art and what goes into making art, that's all my own experience and other thinkers and people that I've encountered. So I don't attribute that to my parents.
So you're a young child. Lori's showing you some cool comics. What first attracted you, or before that maybe, to cross over? You're looking at comics, then you go, well, I can do this. What was the crossover point? Like, did you go to art classes as a kid, or did you excel in school and art, or that sort of crossover point where you go, well, I can do this?
Well, as somebody once said, maybe it was even in Scott McCloud or somewhere else, I read somewhere some statement that's like, it's not so much how somebody gets into making art. It's like all kids make art. It's just that at a certain point, most people are discouraged, or they abandon it, or they find something else by which to define themselves as their identity. They get into, kids are into everything. A kid is into playing baseball. A kid is into their, after school chess club. A kid is into reading fiction. A kid is into a million things. And any one of those things at some point starts to cohere into, this is me. This is what I want. A kid is into karate. A kid is into, Bugs Bunny cartoons. And then they might say, maybe I could be an animator, or, I'm going to be an Olympic gymnast or something. So for whatever reason, for me, drawing and comic books from a pretty early age was something that I identified with. And then there were different periods of my life where I kind of like strengthened that identification and like kind of reinvigorated that identification.
Yeah. There's a joke I'm fond of. The kid gets to the age where they realize their parents have jobs. And so the dad is an art teacher, and the kid goes, so Dad, what do you do to make your living? He goes, I teach people how to draw. And the kid goes, you mean they forgot?
That's a good point. Good.
Okay. So a screenwriting teacher told me a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. A great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Ooh, well, a pretty big role. Although I've recently been introduced to some more ideas about how important it is, the opposite of that, like letting a little bit more natural flow. And but there's so much that's out of your control. I basically apply maximum intention, really. I don't leave very much unintended, although within that intention, you intend all of it to be great. Why would you intend anything to be less than great? I intend every song that I write to be the greatest song I ever wrote, but only a very tiny fraction of them come out that way. So they are products of unintention, whether you're intending or not. All of them are just everything that I make is just an example of how interestingly I failed to reach my intention. Because I'm intending to make something completely spectacular and the greatest thing ever that dominates all history and all future art that nobody will ever surpass. I mean, so they are all just like the unintentional, the weird shapes of the unintentional failures.
Yeah, I think you did it. For me, Complete History of Punk, Lower East Side, 1950, 1975 is masterpiece. But we'll get into that soon. But that was interesting what you said, because we didn't really go into the songwriting on that. But let's do this general question too, because you actually combined the two. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience when you're drawing or writing a song? What role do they have while you're doing it?
Well, everything that I do is for an audience, essentially. I mean, I just take for granted that what I'm doing is something that I'm going to be, that I want other people to see, ideally. So I want it to be good. I'm trying to impress myself. And when I'm very happy with something, I can't wait for people to see or hear it. Like, I can't wait for people to see my new comic book. I can't, but with songs, there's more failure involved. There's a lot of songs that I write that I don't play live, that I don't really care to put in public, because I just don't think they really hit the mark properly. But the ones that I write where I feel very excited about it and I'm like, oh man, I just wrote something great, I can't wait for people to hear this. Yeah, that's very much a part of it. Like, man, I'm really looking forward to when I get to play at an open mic and just try this out on stage. But I want everything to be really good.
Yeah, I like that word victory at the beginning, and this was a great thing you just explained to me. So, Jeffrey, what year were you born?
75.
So what year did you start writing or devising Complete History of Punk Rock, Lower East Side, New York City, 1950, 1975, an eight-minute amazing piece? First thing I ever heard by you. What age did you start that at? How long did that take you to basically put together? You know, he says, I'm going to do this and put this 15 songs, 15 intros, like 10 to 18 seconds each, together as an 8-minute piece.
Okay, well, first of all, the fact that you're saying an 8-minute piece betrays the fact that you're thinking of that one solo acoustic performance of it that's on YouTube, where it's just me sitting on a chair.
Yeah, basically, because Reverend Dan, Music for Nimrods in Los Angeles, played on the radio, and I freaked out when I first heard it. I was like, what the heck? I felt it became what's maybe called a template, that every I think we've talked about this in the past. Every major music movement, the Detroit early rock garage band, just the Detroit music scene, which I was raised in Michigan, should have one of these. East Bay punk, San Francisco punk should have this. And punk is really, in my mind, I'm born in 53. So, all these different music movements, the psychedelic movement in San Francisco that you were talking about, the LA rock, they could all have this done. And in fact, just to step back, did you get this idea from Dickie Goodman? He invented this thing called the break-in, where he him and the Flying Saucer song?
No.
Oh, okay. So, it's basically, yeah, I mean, how did you devise that, and how long did it take you, basically?
Okay, well, there's a few different aspects to this. One, that solo acoustic performance of it is not, to me, a good, I don't like that version of it. That was just an accidental thing that happened where, I always perform, I never perform that song solo. I always perform it with my band on stage with me. I first performed it in 2004. And from the first performance, it was always with other, because it's crucial to me within that piece that the musical evolution is somewhat part of what I'm talking about, is how you go from, it goes from point A to point B. And
Right.
when it's just me playing it all solo acoustic, you don't hear the difference between the folk songs, and you don't hear how evolutionarily interesting it is that the Fugs and David Peel were doing something on an acoustic guitar. And then once you hear the New York Dolls doing it with an electric guitar, you hear that that's the seed of the earlier thing within the later thing. But when it's just me playing an acoustic guitar, it all just sounds like one white guy playing an acoustic guitar, and you don't get the sense of musical evolution that I'm able to do, even if I'm just playing the song with a bass player. Even if I have, but ideally, my ideal version, there's versions on YouTube. There's a version, the best version on YouTube is from 2010, I think, in Paris, or I don't forget the year, but it's or maybe 2011. There's a version live in Paris where I'm playing with my brother on bass and Dave on drums and Kristen Andreasen on keyboard and harmonica. And in that's more of how I intend the song to be. Is
I gotcha.
So,
and what do you call that piece?
Well, anyway, there's a couple other things. One reason for doing that piece is because well, there's a number of reasons, but just because this neighborhood, you know, because I love the Fugs, and the Fugs are very much of the Lower East Side, and these other, and because there was so little information available at that time about New York, there was just a blank space, a dead zone in cultural information, as far as I was aware, in New York City between 1965 and 1975. Everybody knows about the New York City folk scene. You know, the early 60s, you have, you know, Bob Dylan is a folkie, and then people have some awareness that there was a folkie scene, you know, Dave Van Ronk, Phil Oakes, Joan Baez, you know, Tom Paxton, New York City, Greenwich Village folk scene, early 60s. And then, you know, Dylan goes electric in 65. There's the Beatles, there's the Stones, there's the British invasion. All you hear on the radio of 60s music, everybody's awareness of 60s music, all the Doors t-shirts people have, all the Jefferson Airplane albums, it's all West Coast. Here's what was going on the West Coast. Here's what was going on in England. And for me, as a child of New York City, where my parents had this Fugs record, I was like, oh, what was going on in New York City for those 10 years between Dylan going electric and between CBGB's becoming a famous scene for what was called punk? There was 10 years of New York City. Nobody was paying attention. None of it was on the radio. What happened? How did you go from the Fugs to the Velvet Underground and Silver Apples, and so much happened here, and it doesn't form part of the narrative of that era. It's just a blind spot. There's no books about it, or there were no books about it at that time. But since then, since I created that piece, there have been a lot of books about it. So I would not have written that. For example, I would have felt no need to write that piece if the Richard Hell book, I Dreamed I Was a Very Clean Tramp, if that book had already existed, if the book Love Goes to Buildings on Fire, New York City Music in the 70s, if that book didn't exist, if the Ed Sanders book Fug You is another example, and of course Just Kids by Patti Smith. You know, in the years since I wrote that piece, there's been quite a lot of interesting literature about New York City in the late 60s, early 70s. But New York City in that era, prior, when I wrote my piece, there was nothing that I was aware of that connected those dots, that said what was going on in New York City in those years. And because punk was deliberately ahistorical, because punk, as of, the Sex Pistols, deliberately hated the hippies and deliberately tried to claim they had no connection to what came before, that history was kind of buried. So they deliberately didn't, the Sex Pistols didn't want you to think that they had been listening to David Peel records, because David Peel smoked pot and he was a long-haired hippie. But Johnny Rotten loved David Peel. How could he not? How could he not? And yet they needed to perceive themselves as not being connected to long-haired, pot-smoking, anti-Vietnam War hippies. But in New York City, at least, that was part of, anyway, blah, blah, blah.
No, it was really well done. I don't mind you going off on it because it's an important piece. But what do you call it? Is it called Complete History, or is there one short word song for that piece?
Well,
what do you
for
like short, the parallel?
The complete shorthand title. If I write it on a set list, if I'm going to play it with my band, I just write it as Punk History, right? Okay, Punk. But that's not really accurate. My actual title for the piece is The History of the Development of Punk on the Lower East Side of New York City from 1950 to 1975. Because it's not a history of punk, it's a history of the development of punk. And it's very region specific. It's just about this neighborhood. It's just about what was going on in New York City from 1950 to, mostly 1965, but I started a little earlier because Harry Smith was important, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, yeah.
It's so important you included Harry Smith, and you did it so well, saying that he did these other things like collect Easter eggs. And, my favorite Harry Smith thing, one of them is that he purposely got busted in like Albuquerque or, all this stuff, like down there in the Southwest, so that he could learn the string games from the drunken Hispanic dudes in the jail cells. Did you know that?
No, I hadn't heard that.
To me, that's like, how many people on earth would purposely get busted just to learn this folks thing?
That's a great story.
Okay, so onward and upward, Jeffrey. It's fun. Thank you. If clothing extends our skin, knife and fork extends our teeth, pencil extends our finger, what does the guitar extend for you? What humanness or human sensorium does the guitar extend for you?
It is, I guess it is the, well, I was going to say something like it is the telephone that it extends my thought, or it's something foundational upon which my thoughts can be transmitted, but I don't know what that, I mean, you could say maybe it's it's like the lower part of my mouth upon which the tongue rests, or something like that.
That is good. Yeah, lower part of mouth. Yeah, or you're going to stay as a telephone extends your thought. Extends. What would you say the pencil extends for you? Since you've been using a pencil for this whole time, I'm really impressed. You can think and draw at the same time. What does the pencil extend? What humanness does it extend?
Well, I mean, I guess my mind, although that's not a very interesting, eye-opening, shocking answer. It's my way of telling. It's or I guess to be more interesting, you could say my tongue. It's an extension of my ability to tell you what I'm thinking.
That is good. Tongue is good. Yeah, McLuhan says the movie extends your foot. Most people go, no, it extends your eye. No, you're traveling, so you get it. It's just it's a fun game, and you did it well. Thank you so much. So I talked to this filmmaker years ago when MTV first started, and I says, why do video rock editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And he says, because we've learned to take in information faster. Marty Scorsese said he cut his films faster because of MTV. This question's asked with a bias. Can we actually learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Ooh, right. What is the threshold? I'm sure there is an objective answer. Once again, like the previous question you asked about whether thought is faster than light, I'm sure there is an objective scientific answer, and so I would just be guessing, but that's an interesting question to ask. What is the threshold at which we can take in information? For example, if you listen to an audiobook, if you're listening to an audiobook, there's a setting where you can have the audiobook play a little faster, or a dictaphone. If you're transcribing somebody's speech, you can play it a little faster. So you get through it a little faster, but you still understand it. Well, what happens when you set it a little bit faster than that? Well, now I'm listening to this 10-hour audiobook, and I can listen to the whole thing in 7 hours, and I'm absorbing all the information, even though the voice sounds a little bit high pitched. Now, what happens if you set it a little bit faster than that? At what point can you no longer take in the information? There is a point. There is a scientific actual point. I mean, my songs have a lot of words that are sometimes put forward very rapidly, and there is an actual threshold. You hear some rappers experiment with rapping so fast, and you really just can't follow it. Like there is a literal, I mean, the same way they say that a telephone number is a certain, you can memorize a 7-digit number, but you can't memorize a 14-digit number or something. There's a scientific threshold there.
Well, I understand that, but I'm asking you to answer with your intuition and impulse, but that's fine. Here's the real question: is it literally possible to multitask, for humans to multitask?
Yes, certain things, and maybe it's a little different for each person, but absolutely. I mean, I like, for example, when I'm on tour with my band and I have to be in a car, maybe 7 hours a day, maybe 4 hours, maybe 8 hours, maybe 3 hours over the course of a tour. I'm spending every day in a car going from city to city, whether I'm driving or taking turns, sitting in the passenger seat. Why not listen to an audiobook on the life of Napoleon and learn a huge amount? And that's a perfect multitask. There's things like that are perfectly multitaskable. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay, Jeffrey, what was the motive of the cave artist? Not what Werner Herzog said or New Yorker magazine or anthropologist, just off the top of your head, your impulsive, intuitive answer. What was the motive of the cave artist?
Well, I guess boredom, creativity is engagement, creative engagement, both in the image creation and in the creation of meaning around the image. It just gets your brain fired up. It's exciting.
Yeah, Australian Aborigines have no word for boredom. Do you think they still get bored?
I guess not.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Oh, well, why should they be mutually exclusive? I guess. Well, maybe they could be considered mutually exclusive if instead of conviction, the word was I don't know, what would be a good word that's more of the opposite of stubbornness or uncompromisingness versus compromisingness. I guess I guess I would have to say compromise because of that. Because of the historical dialectic, because of synthesis.
Yeah. Hey, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. I'll tell you my two favorite answers were, I asked these kids here about 8 years old or maybe younger. I says, what's more important, conviction or compromise? They go, those words are too big for us.
That's good.
Then I asked this welfare lawyer, well, he was on welfare. I says, what's more important, conviction or compromise? He says, depends on what you mean by important.
That's a very good answer.
Yeah, he switched it. Okay, you've accomplished a lot in your life. How do you rate these three elements, skill, luck, and ambition? What plays the biggest part in second and third?
I mean, I guess I would say skill, but skill doesn't happen without ambition. But ambition is not really the thing. It's the skill that's the thing. But skill doesn't just land on you without ambition being there first. But just ambition. So let's put it another way. Skill. Because if I say skill, that already includes ambition within it. But if I say ambition, that does not automatically include skill within it. So I'm going to say skill with the understanding that it includes ambition as part of itself, because with the skill and the ambition, luck is just going to happen. Luck just happens anyway. But you need the skill. You need the skill to take advantage of the luck, and you need the ambition to build the skill.
Yeah, really well done. I used to ask that question, is ambition based more on fear or joy? Just off the top of your head, in your observations of other humans, what would you say?
I would say fear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't think ambition is I don't think ambition is a natural state. I don't think yeah.
So, dude, you made your living being a comic book artist and a musician your whole life?
No, well, I graduated college in '97. I thought I
What
was
college?
Purchase, State University of New York at Purchase, just a very small, cheap liberal arts school, a little bit north in New York State.
What'd you study?
Literature.
You're kidding.
That
That's amazing.
it
How
was
cool.
not. It was not a school known for literature. It was. It wasn't like a good school to go to for literature or whatever. I was just very apathetic about academics when I was in high school. I got much more into it in college. I kind of got more engaged in learning once I was already there. But it was not a place I would have ended up if I had been ambitious earlier as a teenager. It was just kind of like a half-assed, cheap place. But I'm glad anyway. It was cheap because I was not saddled with a lot of debt when I left. Yeah, I mean, I graduated and I just wanted to be a comic book artist and an illustrator, and I was just working various day jobs and just being a starving artist. And I was like making up songs a little bit also after, I just started making up songs after I graduated, really. And it wasn't until, I didn't really start making a full-time living from the music until like 2002. So there was about 4 or 5 years after college,
Right.
in which I had day jobs, and during which there was certainly no plan of making a living from music. The plan was to make a living with art, and I was not a musician at all.
So you make more your living being music or comic, or 50-50?
Definitely music.
Oh, okay. So tell me 3 of our writers or books that had the biggest impact on you, just off the top of your head if you studied literature.
Oh, you mean in terms of literature? Because I was immediately going to say Our Band Could Be Your Life by Michael Azerrad, about independent touring bands in the United States in the 80s, because that book really formed a template for how I could be a touring band.
Dude, a touring band.
So that really,
yeah.
I mean, that had the biggest actual impact on my day-to-day life and the reality that I built for myself.
But I mean, in the pursuing literature in your life, reading, because it seems as though you're well read, you speak well. What 3 authors or books had a big impact besides that? I mean, like
okay, well, Alan Moore, the comic book writer.
Right. Okay. You said that.
As lowbrow as it sounds for me to say that a comic book writer had the biggest impact, I mean, my philosophies and my approach to reality and my ideas about what art are, and my ideas about what comic books can be, and my ideas about morality. It's astonishing how much of that is from this fucking comic book writer. It's embarrassing. I'm 45 years old, and I should be saying, James Joyce and Virginia Woolf and Shakespeare and Milton, and but really the things that have had the most profound, lasting influence and impact on me are from Alan Moore. It's like it's really quite. It's like weird to say that, but if I really look at it, that's true.
No, I don't think it's weird at all. I've had his name come up a lot. It's important. But I mean, besides that, who else? A couple other book titles or authors?
I think Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad is very profound and impactful, and very multi-layered.
Yeah,
and, is something that I kind of return to as kind of a perfect work of literature and art. Both for its morals, its philosophy, the way that it functions as both an adventure story and a profound treatise on politics and human morality. It just functions incredibly effectively on multiple levels. It's just astonishing. So I'm hard pressed to come up with a more perfect example, but also just because it's so goddamn short, I've read it like 3 or 4 times. So I've gotten a lot out of it in a way that a longer novel that I've only read once, I haven't had a chance to get as richly into. I think James Joyce and Ulysses, which I've never even read all the way through, but the very concept of it, the idea that you could be so rich in a work of art, that it's possible to get that complex and that deep with the work of art, which is something that I see in Alan Moore also. But definitely Ulysses, just as a concept, even though I have to admit that I've started reading it like 4 or 5 times, and I've never made it past like chapter 5 or 6.
No, dude, you don't have to read it. Just have it on your bookshelf. And that's what I asked Ray Bradbury. Have you ever read Finnegan's Wake? He says, I have it on my bookshelf. What should I do now? I says, contemplate it. But, you should see, I can't think of it. I think his name's David. I can't think of his last name, but he gave me his 5-page comic book of Ulysses. I would love to like.
Oh, you know what? I can do better than that. Hold on a second. This is, first of all, to explain, this is my favorite. This is one of my favorite comic books of the last 20 years. Yeah. I've been following this guy's comics religiously for 20 years. And he does every day. He's not the only person to do this concept, but he's my favorite who does it. This is a guy named Ben Snakepit. And I got into his comics when I was living in Austin, Texas. And every single day, he does a little 3-panel strip of his day where he just says, I woke up, I went to work, I got drunk, I ate fried chicken for dinner. And then he has the date, he has the date at the top of the strip, and he lists a song, whatever song he's thinking of, or whatever song seems to, I don't know if it's the song that he's thinking of or a song that he's listening to while he drew the strip, but it's very funny to me to see the variety of songs that he puts at the top of his strips. And for some reason, I find his way of telling his life, and I've read every single day of his life for the last 20 years, and it's just hilarious. I mean, he just gets drunk, he breaks up with his girlfriend, like nothing happens, but it's so engaging, and his like very self-effacing way of presenting it. Okay, so that's my preamble to this Ulysses story. I had a funny idea. The way that Ben Snakepit tells each day in a little 3-panel strip. In my sketchbook, I had this funny idea that where the hell is this? That you could do that if only James Joyce had been a fan of Snakepit comics. He could have saved himself 700 pages and just done Ulysses in a Snakepit style. 3-panel comic. So where the hell is this?
Well, that was enough. You told me.
So here's Ulysses. Yeah. Here's my version. Here's my version of Ulysses done as a Ben Snakepit comic, and it's just the date is June 16th, 1904, and it's walked around Dublin today getting stuff done. Then I had beers with my friend Steven, and they're like, they're getting a little loopy and drunk. That's like the way Ben Snakepit always draws it in Snakepit comics. Molly was already in bed when I got home. And that's it. And the song that he's listening to is "Tales of Brave Ulysses" by Cream. So that's Ulysses, and done by Ben. That's my concept of if Ulysses had been done by Ben Snakepit.
Have you published that cartoon?
No, I sent it to Ben Snakepit. I thought he might. I had no idea if he knows what Ulysses is, but I thought he might get a kick out of it.
Well, we got to talk because it should be published in the James Joyce Quarterly, which I attend the Austin, Texas Finnegan's Wake Reading Club every Thursday night.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's mind blowing. Austin, it's incredible.
Because that's a very specific Venn diagram between Austin, Texas, which is the home of Ben Snakepit and where most of his comics take place, Austin, Texas, and James Joyce. That's the reason that I haven't I didn't put that strip online, because I'm like, nobody knows who Ben Snakepit is. Like, you would have to very specifically know 2 pieces of information to understand what is delightful about my little strip there. So not many people would get it.
No, we'll talk later about this. So I asked for 90 minutes. Could you go a little more, or you got to go in 15?
I'm supposed to meet somebody. Let me check my phone. I'm supposed to meet somebody in a little bit.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Well, the thing is, it's not. It's no challenge for me to just yak and yak and yak and yak. I mean, the challenge.
Okay, well,
let's
go.
And there's, if somebody else is going to interview me at 6:30, my inbox is full of people that want me to do stuff, and it's very tempting to just say yes, 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 yes. I'll do this interview. I'll do this drawing. I'll do blah blah blah. The challenge for me is to actually get my own stuff done and stop yakking to everybody that wants to yak, even though it's great. It's obviously greatly enjoyable, and I could do this all day long.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do the finish off in 15. Is that okay?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Okay. So poet says that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
English.
Is perception reality?
Increasingly so, and I find that that's alarming, but that's the way it's going.
Cecil Taylor, great jazz pianist, says he's just a vehicle, and this just stuff comes through him. So is art making more self-expression, or more artists are just vehicles for whatever dominant culture or technology is present?
Wait, say the question again.
Is art making more self-expression or more? It's both, but is it more self-expression or more a vehicle for whatever dominant technology or culture is present?
Well, you're assuming that there's a self. You're assuming that the question assumes that there's a self other than what technology and culture has created. And I'm incredulous about that. So I think expressing the self is expressing the nexus in which technology and culture has shaped your concept of self and your concept of what you want to do and your concept of communication and what it is you want to communicate and your role within the context of what's going on around you. So there isn't really I don't believe there's a self outside of that or from that.
Good. Can art making be egoless?
Yes.
That's good. Okay, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. Can you tell me, normally we're just taught to overcome weaknesses. Can you tell me a weakness that you've turned into a strength?
I guess my oversensitivity, my nerdiness and my emotional sensitivity and empathy, which is kind of, it could be like paralyzing and crippling as a social defect and a weakness. But in terms of being a songwriter, it has allowed me to plug in very powerfully to emotions in a way that renders them transmissible, that other people recognize, because of that kind of that weakness, that inability to shut off an oversensitivity. I mean, I cry regularly, like all day long. Within every day, I might some song or some thought or some line of poetry or something.
Yeah.
I'm very I'm just like a crybaby about stuff. Things like so that, yeah, the weakness of
No, I got it.
yeah.
Yeah, that was well done. And my mom taught me crying's good. It's like getting toxins out of your body. Besides emotionally, it's getting physical things out through the tears. So, Jeffrey, tell me one major element of your art that's changed and one major element that stayed the same since you started. So let's say with comics and with music.
Well, with comics, I could put this interestingly and say that the opposite effect has applied to. There's an opposite thing that went on in each one. With comics, my original intention since childhood and into adulthood was to approach comics as an illustrator, to be an excellent illustrator and draw very, very well in a sort of objectively well-drawn kind of classic illustration mode, the way that, say, John Romita Sr. or John Romita Jr., the Marvel Comics artists, are just such excellent old-fashioned illustrators. And that was what I wanted to do, to draw really well. And the idea of being a cartoonist seemed very stupid to me. To have a simplified cartoonish approach where the eyeballs are just dots rather than an actual drawing of an eye, that was unappealing to me. But I've learned over, like this comic book that I'm working on now, a lot of it takes place on a sailboat. And a sailboat is an environment with a million little details. But I'm like, it's going to be obnoxious for the reader to see all these millions of details every time I draw this sailboat. A simplified, boiled down, to learn the lessons of the cartoonist, to actually admit that I'm cartooning, not illustrating, has been a real shift for me over the last 20 years in my approach to making comics. Whereas in music, my approach was initially completely de-skilled, just very raw emotional output, while I was deliberately trying to avoid any sign of professionalism or any singing ability, playing ability, recording ability. I was trying to make music that would make no concession to any of the standards that people usually think music has to be enjoyable by. But over the years, I've come to appreciate how much power and communication it can be achieved by actually knowing how to play and sing a little better and record a little better. That I've kind of, I've gotten a little more, a little more technical with the music and technical with the art.
Yeah. Jeffrey, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Draw more and draw more, because it's important, and you get better the more you draw. I didn't know that. I don't think I really knew that yet. I hadn't really grasped that until later in life. And also be more fearlessly honest in your verbal communications with people. Don't, that's a long thing for everybody to have to learn to navigate. But yeah, the ways that I thought I had to talk and express myself were preventing connection rather than fostering it. And it took me a while to learn that.
Yeah. How do you find peace of mind?
Drawing comics.
Can you forget to die?
Yes.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Laugh.
Very good. So, how about this line that comes up? You create what you resist, or Bob Goldthwait says, "You are what you hate." What do you think of that line? I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it, but just one creates what one resists. Any comment?
I don't know. It sounds like two different concepts to discuss. I would say pick one of them. I'll give you a reaction to one of those if you pick one of those statements, because I don't think of they don't make sense to me as being the same statement.
Yeah, it's what you resist persist.
Wait. Say that. Does what you?
No, what one resist persist. You know, if you resist something, it helps it. It's sort of like that. Back to that Alan Watts. So you sort of already addressed it. I'm sort of trying to rush in all the quickies before we end. I want to give Clinton a chance to ask his last one. So I just got a couple more, and then we'll have Clinton. This one is entailing. Joseph Beuys, the artist, said, "Make the secrets productive." Lou Welsh, beat poet, says, "Guard the secrets, constantly reveal them." But with Thornton Wilder in 28, he said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." Jeffrey, you've been really honest. You laid your cards on the table for these last moments time together, and I appreciate it. And I'm not insinuating you haven't done this, but what's it really all about for you?
You mean related to your previous statement, or just in a general sense? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, in a general sense, what's it is like life. What is it all about for you?
I guess it comes back to that Allen Ginsberg statement. We're here to ease the pain of life. All else is drunken dumb show. Something like that. I think that's a pretty good statement.
Yeah, that's good. I love Allen because he really operates on our line level, because we say first thought, best thought.
That's more controversial to me, but
which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Everybody knows the right answer to that. The only people who don't know the right answer to that don't think that there is an answer to that. Anybody who even asks the question knows that it's over. The people who don't think that are just too ignorant to know that there is a right way.
Yeah, I do get about 2% saying under, and they give me why, but the patent is showing it over. Okay, Clinton, if you want to come on, I'm going to have you ask your last question in about 2 questions. Thank you, Clinton, and thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, 2 more. Jeffrey, it's been an honor and a pleasure. What's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today, Jeffrey?
Fact checking on social media. A little bit of hinting in the recent ways that Twitter or whatever, I don't even know who's doing what. But the way that Wikipedia tries to make very clear here's the statement, here's the factual evidence that backs up that statement. Here's a statement, just so you know, we don't know who said this. They didn't back it up with anything. So take that statement with a grain of salt, because there's no evidence backing it up. Very clear way to filter things. Very useful, clear way. And to see that method now starting to be applied to a social media environment that has previously let anything go as though it were a fact, I think that's a very good development for where we are with culture and human thought and perception.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And what gives you the most optimism, Jeffrey?
Um, that in the last 30 years, Republicans have only won the popular vote only once in 30 years. So the country, this is not a country of angry Trumpers. It just, they're loud, but that kind of anger is the minority. People are a little more giving than we would actually believe. People actually want each other to have things like health care. People actually want a little more giving and sharing than we are shown.
Yeah. Really been a pleasure and a joy. Clinton, it's really fine and generous of you to host us today. What do you have for Jeffrey, Clinton?
I would like to find out when someone first got a computer or the internet and how deeply they fell into it. So what about you, Jeffrey?
My mom first got a computer in 1997, and that was the year I graduated college. So there was one computer in my family's apartment from 1997 onward, but it wasn't until the year early 2001, over the winter of 2001, that's when email became a daily suck on my time, a noticeable thing that I was doing for hours every day, and seemed like this is a weird addictive problem.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, well, if
you guys here on my channel, Gerry, take it away.
Yeah, if you have a couple more minutes, Jeffrey, I'd love to ask you about 2 lines in your history of the development of punk rock, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so the Nothing song by Thule is such an amazing song, and it's so applicable to these days of COVID. But when he says there's nothing, no great books and no social anthropology. I mean, did you know Thule well? Did he have a big impact on your life? Because I find it's amazing that he can just spew that out in the middle of the song, because we need people to say there are no good books and there's no social anthropology.
It's an absolutely astonishing recording. It's just, it's one of the great works of art, that recording. But you know what's one thing that's interesting about it, I've got a bootleg. A friend of mine went to Washington, D.C. and went into the Smithsonian archives and smuggled out illegally the original. He smuggled out a digital illegal recording that he made of the original reel-to-reel tapes of the Fugs session in 1965, in April 1965, the 3-hour Fugs session that Harry Smith produced, where I think there was just one microphone in the room and they're just running through as many songs as they can. And they do a few different takes and there's more than one take of Nothing. And all of the live recordings of the Fugs that you hear over the years, from the live recordings on live bootlegs that I've heard from the 60s, or their official live recordings, or versions of Nothing that I've heard the Fugs do live, or, you know, there's many, every Fugs live album always has Nothing on it because it's like one of their most famous songs. Out of all of those renditions, that one version that's on their first album, that was the particular take that they chose from that session, that is the magical. No other version touches the magic of that random, unrehearsed moment in time. Because the lyrics are a bit different in every version, the music's a bit different in every version, and the way it all coalesces in that one moment of seat of the pants performance is just magical. And one of the reasons that it's so magical, I think, is because Peter Stampfel had a harmonica in the room, and he had this harmonica because later in the session he does a rendition of I think it's either Fishing Blues or Romping Through the Swamp. There's some Peter Stanfill is not a harmonica player. There was just one particular song that he wanted to record that had a harmonica on it. So he has this harmonica, and when they start playing Nothing, he starts playing his harmonica for some unknown reason, and it's not really in the key of the song, and he plays it, and it creates this very dark drone, this, and it's like, it's so dark and disconcerting to have this is slightly out of it's not melodically appropriate, and it turns the song what could be seen as like a little more of a joke. It maintains a thread of true darkness in it, in addition to the way the band is just falling apart. You know, the chaos of it, the kind of the lyrics that end up in that version, the vocals, the music, it's just a magical moment that, thank goodness, it was captured on tape.
Yeah, because it evokes so much my love for Frank Zappa too, whose illustrator and graphic designer Cal Schenkel did a cover for the Fugs. You know that, right?
No, I didn't know that.
There's an illustration of a Fugs album where there's a garbage can.
Oh yeah, that's my least favorite Fugs. Golden Filth.
Right, right.
That's a terrible because they just sound so stupid on that record. It's a live performance, and it just sounds like schlock to me. But yeah, I know that image.
Yeah, it's good to know because I just know the image. But Zappa said that stupidity is the building block of the universe, or could be. In this line that you say when you introduce the New York Dolls in History of Punk is, stupid on purpose becomes the new smart. Did you write that line, or where does that line come from?
You know, I don't know. I thought I wrote that line, but maybe that concept coalesced from it might have been something from maybe it was something that I had read about the Ramones. Maybe it was something about the punk ethos.
Yeah.
Regarding the Ramones, I think, you know, maybe there's something like that in the book. Please Kill Me: The Oral History of Punk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if they say that. I don't know if there's anything that says anything like that, but I think the ways that they talk about the Ramones and their kind of like the intelligence of their deliberate stupidity. I mean, I'm just reading into it. I don't think they said it. I don't think they said that specifically, but that probably gave me the idea of the way that the Ramones were perceived. And I could clearly see that the New York Dolls embodied that earlier. Which of course David Peel and the Fugs embodied earlier than that, but the New York Dolls were the first to embody it as an electric rock band, really, kind of right on the heels of David Peel. Anyway, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think I came up with that myself, but it was based on thoughts that had been formulating based on thinking about the Ramones and reading stuff about the Ramones.
Yeah, one of my favorite histories in being in Ann Arbor, Michigan was the John Sinclair rally, where at 2 or 3 in the morning, John Lennon finally came up, but the act before him was David Peel. And my friend stopped smoking pot for the rest of his life because of David Peel. Because they all hated, and David Peel sang that great song, Robert Zimmerman, you know, Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman. Yeah. Amazing. I love it. And so I know we could go on forever. You've been generous with your time. Jeffrey Lewis, thank you so much.
Well, you know, I'll leave you with one thing that I think of quite a lot. You know, I love David Peel. I have a lot of David Peel records. I don't know if there's many people in the world who are a bigger fan of David Peel than I am.
I love him.
But there's a Robert Christgau quote about Robert Christgau wrote a review of a David Peel album in the 70s, and he said, Chris Gow's famous for his very brief reviews of things.
Yeah.
He said something about how David Peel is like a perfect example of the moral failings of inadequate, the moral, what is it? The moral inadequacy of sincerity. Something like that. Those aren't the exact, that's essentially it.
Pretty dang good. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I hope this can go on forever. Thank you, Clinton, and thank you.